This is chapter 5. In this chapter, we're going to be looking at how cells do work. So we're going to spend a lot of time looking at energy and our two major metabolic pathways, which are photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So one of our key characteristics of living organisms is that all living cells require energy. And ultimately, all of the energy coming down from the earth comes from the sun. The sunlight energy is captured by organisms that do photosynthesis. Then this energy is converted into food energy, which then goes from one level of the food chain to the next. And energy follows the laws of thermodynamics. And we're going to be looking at the first the first law of thermodynamics, which is energy cannot be created or destroyed. So there is only so much energy that is available within the universe, and cells are going to utilize this energy and convert it from one form into another. So in living things, how this occurs is that all of the energy is coming from the sun, so that enters into the biosphere. That energy is then converted into food energy through photosynthesis. Cellular respiration, which is done by all organisms, will then convert that food energy into energy stored in the form of ATP, which is our energy storage molecule. So all of this occurs in cells using chemical reactions. So all of the chemical reactions that occur within these living cells is called the metabolism. And our metabolism is very complicated. Again, we're just going to look at two big pathways, photosynthesis and cellular respiration. But these metabolic pathways, they are chains of linked chemical reactions, and they can be used to either produce a molecule in a cell. So for example, in photosynthesis, plants and other organisms will take sunlight energy and they will use it to produce glucose. In other cases, we can have reactions or pathways that will break down molecules. So cellular respiration is a good example of this. In cellular respiration, we take that glucose or we take that food and we break it down, extract out energy, and then hold that in ATP. So here, this image is showing different metabolic pathways, and metabolic pathways can be used to break and create carbohydrates. So we have carbohydrate metabolism pathways. We have metabolism of lipids, which are the fats and the oils in the green. We have nucleotide metabolism, which are our nucleic acids, so the DNA and the RNA. We can also metabolize amino acids, which are used to create proteins. So we see all four of our different biological molecules listed here, and cells are constantly creating these molecules and also breaking them down. And this also has to do with energy transfer. So as we produce molecules, that requires energy. And as cells break down molecules, that is going to release energy. So like I mentioned, we are going to look at two major metabolic pathways that are really important in our biosphere or in living organisms. So those are our two main metabolic pathways that we looked at in this chapter. So it's all about converting energy from one form into another form. So these reactions that we're looking at, when we do a reaction that we're investing energy into it and creating things, that's called an anabolic reaction. So that's over here in this red on the left. So an anabolic reaction, we need energy to go into that reaction. We take monomers or building blocks. We'll use that energy to hook those building blocks together to make the polymers. So an anabolic reaction, one is photosynthesis. So photosynthesis, we're taking energy from the sun, using it to make carbohydrates or sugars. On the other hand, those big molecules, those polymers that were created can be broken back down, and that's a catabolic reaction. In a catabolic reaction, energy is going to be released, and those building blocks will be broken apart back into its monomers. So this is what happens during cellular respiration. So you can see our two big metabolic pathways that we're going to be looking at. Photosynthesis are going to be creating molecules. We have to invest energy into it. Cellular respiration is going to break down those molecules. We're going to extract out energy, and cells will capture that energy that's being released in the form of a molecule called ATP. So ATP is a type of molecule called an energy carrier. So this is going to hold on to energy, and then we can break that ATP back apart to extract out energy, so it's on-demand energy. It's kind of like a battery, so the ATP stores energy until it's needed, or you can think of ATP as like a currency that we can use to buy things within the cell or to do things within the cell. So every living cell uses ATP, and that is just short for adenosine triphosphate. And ATP powers pretty much everything that the cell needs to do, including responding to the environment, maintaining homeostasis, reproducing, growing. So all those living characteristics, cells need energy to fulfill or to do those characteristics. So if a cell runs out of ATP, that cell will die because it no longer will be able to do anything. In addition to ATP, there's a couple of other energy carriers that we're going to see. So there's NADPH, which we'll see during photosynthesis. There's NADH and FADH2, and we'll see those two show up during cellular respiration. These three molecules are also energy carriers, but they will carry energy for a very short amount of time, and that energy that they carry will eventually be converted into ATP, especially in cellular respiration. So we're going to be looking at photosynthesis first. So photosynthesis, this is a metabolic pathway. It's the way that our planet stores energy from the sun. During photosynthesis, oxygen is also produced that we can use for cellular respiration. This is also the oxygen that we require, that we breathe in, and then we breathe out carbon dioxide. Photosynthesis occurs in the specialized organelle called the chloroplast. So these chloroplasts, again, are found in plants. They're found in some of the algae. And then some bacteria can also do photosynthesis. They don't have chloroplasts, but they have a similar setup or mechanism to run this pathway. Within the chloroplast, there are these green stacks that look like pancakes. Those are called thylakoids. So these green stacks, this is where our photosynthesis is going to occur. So what happens during photosynthesis? There are two stages. So the first one is called the light reaction. So this is the stage that requires solar energy. So what happens here is that the sunlight will hook up with water that will create some energy carriers, specifically the NADPH. This will also create some ATP, and oxygen will be produced as a byproduct. So basically, we are taking that energy from the sunlight and converting it into energy carrier molecules, the NADPH and the ATP. This NADPH and ATP are then taken into the second stage, which is our light-independent reaction, or it's also referred to as the Calvin cycle, so it's named after the individual that discovered it or worked out the steps. So this oxygen that is going to be released as a waste, the energy carriers, the NADPH, the ATP, are going to go into the Calvin cycle. So we don't require any solar energy, so it's light independent. We don't need any of that energy coming in. We're going to get energy from those energy carriers and the ATP. So this Calvin cycle, or this light independent reaction, this is where the plant will take carbon dioxide. It will take those energy carriers and ATP from our light reaction, so that first reaction, and that energy will be used to take the carbon dioxide, hook the carbon molecules together. So what this looks like in our chloroplast. So here we have our sunlight coming in at the top. We have water that's also coming in. That water is going to donate hydrogens or electrons, which are used to create our energy molecules, the ATP, the NADPH. Then oxygen is going to be released as a byproduct or a waste product. So that is our light reaction. These energy molecules, the ATP, the NADPH, they enter into the Calvin cycle along with carbon dioxide. Here, that carbon dioxide will be fixed. It'll be used to create glucose. So glucose is created over here. And then those energy molecules, we extracted the energy out, so they will go back into the light reaction to pick up more energy over here. So we have these two steps that are constantly going around and around. So these steps in these reactions, so in the light reaction and in the light independent reaction, each of those reactions are run by enzymes. So enzymes are biological catalysts, or they're molecules that are used to speed up chemical reactions within living organisms. So cells cannot just kind of sit around and wait for things to happen. Our cells need to create food, they need to break down food, they need to reproduce, they need to maintain homeostasis very, very quickly so that they don't die. So enzymes are going to facilitate or help all of these metabolic reactions. And without enzymes, life would not exist because everything would be too slow. Living things would not be able to survive by just waiting around for food to be created or for food to be broken down and extract out ATP. So enzymes are really important. So what they do is they help these reactions. So they bind onto the substrates or the reactants in a chemical reaction. They help facilitate that process. And in this example, we're taking two things. We're taking a purple molecule and a green molecule. They go into the enzyme will hook those two parts together, release a product, and this will allow us to go faster. These enzymes are not used up in this reaction, so they can be used over and over, so they're very efficient and they really help to speed up all these chemical reactions. So our second big metabolic pathway is cellular respiration. So this occurs in the organelle called the mitochondria. So during cellular respiration, what happens is we take that sugar, we take that food, we take oxygen, and out of it we produce carbon dioxide, a lot of ATP, which is the main goal of this, and water is also produced. So like I mentioned, this occurs in the cell's mitochondria, and this is the main way that all cells obtain energy, including animal cells. So we can actually put all cells get energy this way. Plants do this, bacteria do this, or a similar reaction. So this cellular respiration is split up into 4 steps, or 3, sorry, in this book. So the 3 main steps that we're going to be looking at is called glycolysis, there's the Krebs cycle, and then oxidative phosphorylation. So these steps are pretty complicated. So glycolysis right here on its own just has 10 chemical reactions within it. The Krebs cycle has 8. So it's very complicated. So we're going to really focus on what goes into these steps. I call them the inputs. And then what comes out of these steps are the outputs and where it happens, or the location. So we're just going to work through each of these 3 main steps. So glycolysis, this is the first stage or first step in cellular respiration. So it occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell, which is the location. So this is really important because glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm. So this can be done by any type of cell. So the steps of glycolysis that I mentioned, there's 10 of them. They are identical in humans as they are in bacteria cells. So glycolysis is a very old or ancient metabolic pathway. It's anaerobic, which means it does not require any oxygen. In this process, we take sugar, so glucose, and it's split into a 3-carbon compound called pyruvate. So what's going into it is glucose. What is coming out of glycolysis is pyruvate. In addition, while our glucose is being split in half, so glucose has 6 carbons, we split that into 2 3-carbon molecules. As that's done, for each glucose molecule that's split in half, we get out 2 ATP molecules and 2 energy carriers called NADH. So what we're doing is we're taking that food, that glucose, we're breaking it apart, extracting out that energy from it. That pyruvate that was created at the end of glycolysis will then go into the Krebs cycle. So this is the second stage. It occurs in the mitochondria, and it is also anaerobic, so it does not require any oxygen. And this is an enzyme-driven reaction. So we just talked about those enzymes, and Krebs cycle has 8 reactions, and each of those 8 reactions has its own enzyme. So what happens during the Krebs cycle is that carbon backbone of our pyruvate molecule is further broken apart, and that carbon is used to create carbon dioxide, which is released as a waste product. And this makes sense. We breathe out carbon dioxide as a waste product of cellular respiration. As that pyruvate molecule is broken apart, converted into carbon dioxide, we extract out even more energy. So we get more energy carriers, we get some more ATP, we get more NADH from this, and we also get an energy carrier called FADH2. So these energy carriers, we are right now just kind of collecting them off to the side. The ATP can be used right away. The NADH and the FADH2 are going to be sent on to our third step, which is the oxidative phosphorylation. So oxidative phosphorylation, this is the third stage of cellular respiration. So this also occurs in the mitochondria, so that's its location. This process is different. It's aerobic, so this is where our oxygen's going to come into play. And I'm going to point out this is the very first time we actually see oxygen show up. So this has to have oxygen available. So what happens is we have what's called an electron transport chain, and this is a group of proteins and other molecules embedded into a membrane. This electron transport chain, it's going to pass electrons and hydrogen atoms down the chain from one molecule to the next. Those electrons and hydrogen atoms come from our energy carriers. So we have our NADH, FADH2. So basically what's happening is these H's are the hydrogens. They are going to be taken off these molecules, and they're going to be passed down from one protein to the next through that electron transport chain, and they're eventually going to be caught at the very end by oxygen to create water. So oxygen shows up at the very, very last step of cellular respiration during oxidative phosphorylation. And this is going to convert that oxygen into water, which is also a waste or byproduct of cellular respiration. So what this does is the electron transport chain, as those electrons are being transported down the chain, there's something that's occurring within the cell. So what's going to happen is that there's going to be a hydrogen gradient that is established. So on one side of this membrane, we have a very high concentration of hydrogen ions. And then on the other side, there's a low concentration of hydrogen ions. So these hydrogen ions, they want to spread back out. So they want to go from high to low concentration. And these hydrogen ions, in order to do that, they have to go through a protein called ATP synthase. So ATP synthase, as those hydrogen ions go from high to low concentration, that ATP synthase is going to synthesize or generate ATP. Remember, that is the whole goal of cellular respiration, is to make as much ATP as possible from this. So this process right here that requires oxygen, this is really important because sometimes our cells will, and they'll do this by a process called fermentation. So fermentation, this allows cells to generate ATP only through glycolysis, so that very first step that we looked at. So this, just a reminder, so this is going to occur in the cytoplasm of the cell. It's an anaerobic process, so it does not require any oxygen. So remember, glycolysis, what happens during this is that it starts off with glucose. That glucose is divided in half to create pyruvate. As that pyruvate is generated, we also get some ATP. And other energy carriers. So if oxygen is available, that pyruvate will go into the mitochondria, and then it will go through those other two stages. So we'll have the Krebs cycle and oxidative phosphorylation. If oxygen is not available, that pyruvate will be processed into alcohol and carbon dioxide, which is what bacteria and yeast do. So if you think about it, especially yeast, so yeast, if we put it into an anaerobic environment, so bread or beer, it will produce alcohol in the beer and wine, and also carbon dioxide, so we end up with bread that has air holes or air bubbles in it. In humans and other mammals, instead of producing alcohol and carbon dioxide, our cells produce lactic acid. And if you're familiar with exercise at all, or if you've been in sports in the past, lactic acid is what builds up in your muscles. It causes kind of like a burning sensation. It makes your muscles very tired until our muscles can actually clean up that lactic acid. So unfortunately, our cells don't create alcohol. Otherwise, you would get drunk by going running and exercising, our cells produce lactic acid, which is not a very pleasant feeling. So as that pyruvate is converted into other substances, this will allow for the production of NADH, energy carrier to help support glycolysis. Excuse me, sorry. So this is really interesting. So we can still create ATP even if you don't have oxygen available within that environment.